What I saw that day of the slaughter of so many sharks and rays, I just realised we have to do something to stop this.
Some dive sites, we used to see 6, 7 sharks in one dive.
You can wipe out the local shark population very quickly.
Dave Charlie is something of an international citizen. Born in Liverpool, the son of a travelling clergyman, he spent much of his life in Brazil. It was his addiction to scuba diving and the underwater world that led him to choosing tofu on the Mozambican coast as his home.
And then I followed my passion for the underwater world and set up the first company in Mozambique to specialise in underwater imagery.
It was this obsession with the marine world that led Charlie to an uncomfortable discovery. The once plentiful shark population off this Mozambican coastline was rapidly diminishing. He took us further up the coast, hoping to show us why he was so worried.
And this is what it's all about. And it's estimated that around 70 million sharks are being slaughtered every year simply for their fins.
While that may be a global figure, Mozambique is just one example of how close the sharks are to being wiped out.
So when you take out the apex predators, that the whole ecosystem is affected. A huge percentage of Mozambicans' population rely on fishing and marine resources to survive, but they're putting that all at risk by taking out the sharks.
Dave, in the meantime, has met kindred spirits in underwater cameraman Chris Scarf and former fashion model, photographer Aaron Kokoski. Together they set about making a documentary on the plight of the sharks. Recorded during the making of the film, Chris and Aaron were under no illusions about the importance of the task at hand.
We've just pulled up next to the fishermen and it looks as though they've got a shark on the line. So we're just going to get kitted up right now, right here, and we're going to jump in fairly quickly because we don't want to lose this shark. We want to get the footage.
Chris, who filmed the documentary, was behind the camera for our shoot too.
3-4 years ago they were pulling in 15-20 sharks a day. Now it's 1 or 2.
Dave was leading his new friends into a very different world.
I was invited to come and film inside a shark camp in Mozambique, and that has changed my life from that day.
Shark camps are tiny villages dedicated to catching sharks. Having lived in Brazil, Charlie is fluent in Portuguese and could thus communicate with the fishermen at the shark camp, where he and his colleagues have spent much time. They've developed a close bond with two fishermen in particular, Joaquim Cunebani, who has been fishing this coastline all his life, and Nelson Macamo, who caught his first shark when he was just a boy.
So the first time he caught a shark, he was just 15 years old, and the older guys on the boat actually asked him to kill the shark, but he was too afraid. So he built up the courage and went back by himself the next day and finally killed his first shark.
Joaquim's been fishing longer than Nelson. He clearly remembers when he and the rest of the village started targeting sharks.
Joaquim has been fishing here for 14 years, but 2 years ago he abandoned the traditional fishing methods of line and bottom fishing and he started focusing on sharks.
The village where they live is a shark camp. What goes on here is essentially the slaughter of sharks by people desperate to make a living.
He started targeting sharks because the numbers of other fish were dropping and he was struggling to feed his family, and he could see that the sharks had a lot of value in their fins, and that's the reason why he started focusing catching sharks.
As was the case with Nelson.
And he knew that this form of fishing would bring in money for him and his family.
But since catching the likes of tiger and Zambezi sharks on a rowing boat is not recommended practice, the big question is where the sudden demand came from.
The fishermen have no idea why the Chinese nationals want the fins and also why they have so much value. He just knows that people come to this remote beach to buy the fins.
So just how much are they paid for them?
He won't tell me how much he receives for the shark fins, but what he has told me, in the last 3 months, he's not even caught a single shark, which means he's been living in poverty for the last 3 months, which was exactly the reason why he started to catch sharks 10 years ago.
A long drive south of the rudimentary shark camps is the holiday paradise of Tofu. It's here that marine biologist Dr. Simon Pearce has chosen to work, specifically because of the richness of the bay's marine habitat. Pierce says these camps discovered by Dave are a new threat to the shark.
So seeing more evidence of shark fishing along the coastline, you tend to get these small shark fishing camps of a few people fishing for sharks, and they're turning up in places where there's no traditional fisheries for sharks, there's been no prior demand, and that's all just happened in the last few years.
With the bay off Tofu a bit like his private laboratory, Pierce quickly got to grips with the threat posed to the super predator. He's worried about the illegal commercial vessels operating off Mozambique.
We've had more and more reports of illegal fishing vessels coming into Mozambican waters, especially from Taiwan and Indonesia, and they're here to get shark fins.
The whole shark is removed from the marine ecosystem just for a tiny part of the predator, something best described by a chef at a Chinese restaurant in Maputo.
Today we will introduce how important for shark fins to Chinese soup.
Costing anything around $75 for a bowl, apparently it's all about flaunting your wealth.
Some people use this soup to show how powerful they get, how successful in the business. They can drink this soup because this soup is very expensive.
Most consumers of shark fin soup probably don't realize that their culinary habit has had unintended consequences. It's harming the health of the fishermen who catch the sharks, especially as it's replaced fish in their diet.
Shark meat has become their major source of protein, and we tested every single sample of sharks that we came across last year during the making of our film, and every single sample was poisonous. And it had high levels of methyl mercury, which will affect your central nervous system.
Methyl mercury, which is a known toxin for people, it's in incredibly large quantities in this shark tissue. It's up to about 18 times what humans should be eating. So unfortunately, people have been eating the shark tissue, they've been passing it on to their kids, pregnant mothers, and it could have really serious developmental effects for them.
And if you consume considerable amounts of shark meat, it's impossible to avoid.
Most of the mercury in marine systems has been introduced by human pollution, and the problem is that animals find it very difficult to expel it from out of their bodies. So as you move up the food chain, you tend to get more and more of it accumulating. And then right at the top of the food chain, you get sharks, and because they're long-lived and they've got large oil-filled livers that tends to accumulate some of these heavy metals, they've got really large quantities of mercury in their system. Then when people eat it, same thing, it just gets transferred to the people.
With a coastline of almost 3,000 kilometers and most Mozambicans living off the sea, education about conserving the country's dwindling marine resources is vital, which is where the role of Carlos Makwakwa, the first Mozambican to have qualified as an underwater diver, is crucial.
Where I come from, they don't know anything about the ocean, and just the fish that the fishermen catch. Just imagine if you look at the ocean, it's just big and flat, but if you go in, it's different. You know, you see the reef and you can understand the current, you know how the fish live.
Some of the most powerful conservation interventions can come from people that have grown up here their whole life saying, I am seeing this underwater and we need to do something about it.
Today, a dive instructor earning a decent living from the world beneath the waves, Carlos recognizes that he can teach more than basic awareness of the ocean. So he established a marine environmental organization aimed at educating young Mozambicans about the value of their marine world.
When I became instructor and know a little bit more about the sharks and their importance, I wanted another Mozambicans to become divers.
Congratulations. Well done.
Dave Charlie has since also had good news. On our visit to the fishing camps, he discovered that the communities have stopped eating shark meat.
Joachim is telling me that everyone in this area has now stopped eating shark meat because of our film. And it's not just in this small community, but many, many communities following out. They're not even allowed to sell shark meat anymore because they've heard it's poisonous.
While this means that they have to revert to old fishing methods where they can find fish, possibly as important is the fact that they were armed with knowledge when making this decision.
So the key thing is now is that marine conservation is coming from Mozambicans.
Which is all very well, as long as there's something left to save, if the trade in shark fin can be stopped.
I think it will stop only when the sharks are finished. The sharks are decreasing so much So one day they will be gone completely.